Electronics Recycling. My name is Walter Alcorn. I'm the Vice President for Environmental Affairs for the Consumer Electronics Association. We very much appreciate you coming for this panel. Before we get started with our panel, though, we have a special honor today. We have the top environmental official in the United States, Ms. Lisa Jackson. The administrator is here and has very generously agreed to provide some opening remarks to the session. So, Administrator Jackson, please come up, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. I think my job in such an occasion is to be brief and at least not deathly boring. I want to say good morning to the panel, and I want to apologize in advance. I have to go to the next panel, so I will not be able to hear this discussion. But looking at the bios and getting a chance to talk to everyone, I think you're in for a treat on a really important topic. And I want to thank Walter for his leadership in pulling this together and for his generosity and giving me a few minutes. I'm really glad to be here to take part in the discussion. This is an urgent issue, and it's more complex than it sounds, and that is managing electronic waste. As many of you know, and if you don't know, you're going to hear in a minute, industry and government have been working together to tackle this challenge. It's an environmental challenge, certainly. It's a public health challenge, as you'll hear. But it's also a challenge that, like most challenges, presents opportunities. Opportunities for innovation, opportunities to save money and increase the bottom line, and probably most important in this economy, opportunities to create good jobs. In 2011, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, joined the General Services Administration and the Council on Environmental Quality in the White House to release a national strategy for electronic stewardship. We developed the strategy to answer President Obama's call to create a framework for the government to help protect public health and the environment from the unsafe or improper handling of used electronics. It's an important effort, and I think it's a very important time. Already, our country alone generates some 2.5 million tons of electronic waste per year. Not only do these discarded electronics contain potentially dangerous chemicals and pollutants, they also contain important precious metals, rare earth metals, plastics, and glass that can be and hopefully will be recovered and recycled. That reduces economic costs and environmental impact of securing new products or new materials. Active involvement of the government is one thing, but active involvement and partnership with the private sector is vital. Thankfully, many of the biggest electronic manufacturers have already stepped forward and demonstrated their commitment to safely recycling and refurbishing their products. Samsung, Dell, LG, Panasonic, and other companies have signed on to the Sustainable Materials Management Electronics Challenge that EPA announced just last year. And they've committed to, get this, sending 100% of the used electronics they collect for reuse and recycling to third-party certified electronics recyclers. That's why we call it a challenge. We know folks aren't there yet, but that's a huge commitment. And one of the things we find in recycling, in reuse of products, is that those who are going to take the products, and I'm sure we're going to hear this on the panel, need to know that there is going to be a steady stream of material coming in. That's how they grow their business. That's how they can hire workers. That's how they can scale up to meet the challenge. So when we have people committing to 100%, that's their goal and their vision, it gives small business owners and others the ability to make plans for how to grow their businesses and how their businesses will grow. I'm proud because these companies are helping to ensure that these practices become common throughout the industry sector, and that the process of research and innovation and development and commercialization of a new product is not complete unless you're also focusing on recycling. Of course, EPA and indeed the entire federal government and our partners there have an important role to play as well. President Obama has called on us, as the nation's largest consumer of electronics, to lead by example on electronics stewardship. The national strategy that I mentioned earlier also outlines how the federal government must behave, that we can promote the development of more efficient and sustainable electronic products, that we can direct federal agencies to buy, use, reuse, and recycle their electronics responsibly, that we must support recycling options and systems for American consumers, and that we must strengthen America's role in international electronics stewardship. So when you think about those 4 tasks, you realize that addressing e-waste is indeed no small task. We need to think about everything from how to design more efficient and sustainable technology to making sure consumers have widespread access to recycling drop-off locations and other options for easily donating or recycling their used electronics. But the good news is that the history of protecting our environment and our health is a history of innovation. So we like to feel just a little bit of kinship with the entrepreneurs and innovators in this room. It's the better ideas and new products that have helped make almost everything we do cleaner and safer and healthier and more energy efficient. So I have no doubt that working together, we can hand in hand use that same innovation as a tool to make sure that these recycling goals, that e-waste is not a problem, but in fact a very conquerable challenge. Thanks very much. Walter, I leave you and the excellent panel to inspire these folks further. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Administrator Jackson. Again, we are very honored to have the sitting EPA Administrator here, but we have a number of other distinguished guests as well on the panel. Just a little bit about our format before we dive in. What we'll start with is, I would say, opening statements. This is not a courtroom, but I would say opening statements by the panel members on the topic. And then I'll start with a couple of questions to get the discussion going, and then we would encourage folks in the audience who have questions to raise your hand. We do have a microphone, roving microphone, so that you can ask questions, and we look forward to a good, healthy discussion. So I guess I'll just start here in order. Cindy, if you could get us started, just introduce yourself and feel free to say a couple of words about the topic.
Okay, so I'm going to start it off, make sure that we've got good sound here. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay. I wrote a couple notes down, so I apologize in advance for reading a little bit, but I just want to make sure I was getting all the information across to you. I'm Cindy Erie. I'm president of eWorld Recyclers and eWorld Online. We manage collection and recycling programs for OEMs through our manufacturer's interstate take-back system, also commonly known as MITS. We have the industry's most comprehensive and up-to-date directory of drop-off locations. We work in conjunction with Earth 911 on that. We have a national network of certified recyclers and proprietary software that manages, tracks, and reports collection. We also ensure compliance in states with mandated programs, but it's also used to document the results of our OEMs partners' voluntary programs in other states. We've collected about 120 million pounds of end-of-life electronics since the inception of MITS, and we work with companies like Sony, Acer, and ViewSonic, just to name a few, and we've always achieved the target of their collection goals. We just announced yesterday that we are managing, tracking, and finding new markets for returned merchandise for Costco nationwide. We're using the infrastructure that we created for MITS. We're utilizing that software and our network of recycling facilities to help Costco cut costs and reduce waste. That's a new announcement. Yeah, it came out yesterday. Thank you.
Okay. And be sure to move the mics down. So, Mike?
Hi, folks. I'm Mike Watson, Director of Compliance for Dell's Global Take-Back Programs. And in that role, I've been in that role for 10 years now. We launched the first free consumer program globally in 2004. We were the first OEM to offer our customers free end of life for any of our products, anything with a Dell brand on it. You go to dell.com/recycling, and anywhere in the world, you can send it back to us for responsible recycling. We made a commitment in the early 2000s to collect 1 billion pounds of material of our product for responsible recycling by 2014. We're well on our way. We're nearly to the conclusion of the first 1 billion pounds running through our programs. And we also, 7 years ago, launched a partnership with Goodwill Industries in many locations around the country. We cover about 65% of the U.S. population. Anywhere a participating Goodwill is, you take your electronics, any of your IT equipment to any Goodwill, and the back end of, so Goodwill collects it, and our trucks back up to it, and we process it responsibly. And that program to date has collected nearly 500 million pounds of product since inception. And we're growing our collection take back. As Lisa said, it just keeps growing. We're growing at approximately 25% year on year of our take back programs worldwide. And I'm glad to be here today, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. Mike Moss.
Greetings and good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. Walter mentioned something about talking about a legislative model a couple days ago, so I'll spend just a couple minutes to talk about what I think it could be like. First, a little bit about Samsung Electronics. Over the past 4 years and a few months, we've had a flagship recycling program, Samsung Recycling Direct, and in that time, we've responsibly recycled over 250 million pounds of e-waste in the U.S. And what's amazing about this is not just that it's been responsibly recycled, but it's been recycled voluntarily, at least over 50 or 60% of it. And this is really a strong statement about our ability to have awareness about all the different stakeholder perspectives and drawing a balance and trying to optimize our approach to being a part of society. So let me talk just a little bit about a legislative vision. I think that e-waste legislation has been rapidly evolving over the past 4 years, and in my opinion, a legislation that's going to be truly functional and effective has to have 3 critical components. And one of those is a level playing field. The next is a market-based platform for operations, and then also the ability for negotiated coverage. Negotiated coverage is very important because it allows us to move beyond strictly mandated, highly prescribed metrics and towards negotiation. So what that means is manufacturers stepping out, talking with stakeholders, having a discussion, finding out exactly what's needed to do on a state-by-state or region-by-region basis. And then on the part of the manufacturers, going out there and creating those results. Now, in the middle of those negotiations and discussions is the ability of manufacturers to, also negotiate for a little bit of flexibility so we can do things according to what an efficient market might hold. And this leads into the flexibility that allows for something of competition, actually. It leads to competition. And manufacturers love to compete. So if we compete, we have the ability to innovate, create, and get all these market efficiencies, cost efficiencies together. And what happens then? We do a better job, the price comes down, and we have more resource for more activity. And just imagine with the more resource we buy and develop and purchase modern technology, modern systems, ways of doing things, and this leads to a lot of great impacts for society, such as taking the materials, processing, refining them further than what they are today, and reintroducing them at a higher level into the products that they're going to go into ultimately. So it's really a great vision of what I think legislation should be about, and I think it needs all these components. We can't do it all voluntarily, so we need a level playing field, and we need legislation to make that happen, in my opinion. And then finally, how's it going to get implemented? I think it would get implemented through a representative organization that is primarily manufacturer-driven by a board of manufacturers, And then this organization would have two basic functions. Externally, this group would go out with the stakeholders and talk about the issues and make a discussion and determine what the results ought to be. And then they will go out and manage these results. And then on the internal side, this representative organization will simply govern the members and set policies for the members, such as obligation models and so forth like that. So that's the way I look at it, and happy to see you here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And everyone should digest some of what Mike said. We may have some questions about that a little bit later, so thank you. Scott, please.
Thank you, Walter. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Weislow. I'm the Director of Recycling and Waste Minimization for Best Buy. I have to have a double long business card for that title. What does that mean? I run our recycling program as well as our carbon emissions reduction work. Best Buy, hopefully everyone knows, runs a voluntarily driven comprehensive e-waste recycling program at more than 1,100 locations around the country. Yes, everyone knows us, hopefully. It's fast, free, easy for our customers, a nice outlet for them to get rid of their material that's either unwanted or used or trading in as well. As of 12/31, end of the calendar year, I'm proud to say we are very close to hitting 700 million pounds collected towards our, excuse me, our 1 billion pound goal by 2014. So making a lot of progress, very excited about that. I would say on e-waste policy, what Mike said, I am in quite a bit of agreement with him. Best Buy supports legislation that has achievable goals, that provides convenient solutions for our customers. Recycling collection targets are more desirable than, say, convenience requirements, saying having a certain number of collection points in communities or other locations. We'd rather have it focused on achievable goals around volume, things like that. That being said, the 25 states that have enacted legislation today, it sparked innovation, it sparked awareness around the e-waste problem, so very happy about that. Ideally, though, I think we'd like to see an overarching federal law that would address this as well. But right now, we have the patchwork legislation with the states. It's working pretty well. Excuse me, working very well. And it is challenging, obviously, for us with 1,100 locations around the country to try and manage around the 25 state laws. But we're doing it well, and we think it's good partnerships with everybody else here as well. Thank you.
Great. Senator Urquhart, thank you for coming to CES and being on this panel. Appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm in the Utah Senate. I've been in our legislature for 13 years. I want to tell you where we ended up, which I would argue is a very good place, and something that you might want to pursue in your states, and I'll tell you a bit how we got there. And never met any of my co-panelists, but in my notes I wanted to thank Walter and Best Buy and Samsung for the help that they are providing our state in accomplishing our goals of recycling consumer electronics. Ralph Becker, who's the mayor of Salt Lake City currently, when he was in the legislature, he pursued e-waste recycling. That was looking at more a point of sale charge or tax that would go into a recycling program. That doesn't really fit the Utah model. We think that we try to be very business friendly, realizing that business and industry, they're the ones in the trenches, they're the ones who are far more innovative than government. And so government, it can get out of the blocks in a hurry on some of these programs, but then it becomes locked in a certain place, and it can't keep up with the pace of change and innovation in a lot of sectors, especially the rapidly changing consumer electronics market. So Becky Edwards, a good friend of mine in the House, she took up e-waste legislation in 2010. Again, it was a point of sale charge or tax. And I coupled up with Becky, and I said, look, we've shut these discussions down prematurely, too early. I'm arm in arm with Becky. I want this conversation to go forward. And so that legislation, it didn't pass, and I even had a hand in it not passing, but I told everyone, I said, look, let's be very serious about this and do something in 2011. And so Walter got involved, hired local people in the trenches, lobbyists, Jody Hart, Rob Jolly, and they did a great job of interacting with us and interfacing and helping us come up with something that I think is very business friendly and ultimately will be a wonderful solution. So what we did is we came up to sell consumer electronics in Utah. You have to do two things, and this was SB 184, which I sponsored in 2011. You first have to report to our Department of Environmental Quality what is going on with recycling, what you're doing. And then Department of Environmental Quality, they report to a couple of our legislative committees. And then the second thing you have to do is you have to establish and implement a public education program on collection and recycling programs. And so CEA has been key in that with their Greener Gadgets program. Anyone who wants to recycle, they can easily find out. I put in my zip code recently, pointed me out to Best Buy, a couple other locations. Deseret Industry, which is kind of a Utah version of Goodwill, they're extremely helpful in this. We have some other points of collection. But if you're looking what to do in the states, and I would maybe argue against going to a national standard, because I think you're for a national standard if it's the standard you like, but you might not get that. And so it makes some sense to have states kind of work these things out and look at where it's working well, and try to emulate those. And I would argue that you might want to look at Utah. I think that we have an effective industry-government partnership.
Thank you very much, Senator Urquhart. We really appreciate working with you and your leadership on this. It's very, very, very noteworthy. Garth Hickel from state of Minnesota. Garth?
Good morning, and thanks, Walter. I really appreciate the invitation from CEA to participate on the panel today. My name's Garth Hickel, and I'm the Product Stewardship Team Leader with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Our e-waste law is one of the 25 that has been referenced. It was enacted during the 2007 legislative session after 5 years of quite intense discussion and debate. It is a market share model, so it's quite similar to what's in place in Indiana, Wisconsin, and the other market share states in terms of using that metric of pounds sold into Minnesota on a program year basis to establish the obligation for manufacturers. We've been quite pleased with the outcome over the last 5 years. We are averaging about 32 million pounds that are collected and recycled annually. That translates into right around 6 pounds per capita. However, I think that as the program has matured, we've heard feedback from various stakeholders, we've observed the landscape, we've been obviously continuing to track public policy developments around the globe related to e-waste, is that we've really come to a conclusion that not unlike so much of the emphasis here on innovation and new product development, that the public policy process really needs to reflect an innovative approach as well, and really being able to accommodate so many of the changes that are obviously inherent within the consumer electronics industry. So we are in the process of developing a strategy to kick off this summer to what we hope will be a pretty radical change to the program in Minnesota for consideration for the legislature in 2014. We feel that it really needs to encompass more products beyond those that are just simply stipulated in statute. It needs to actually have a decrease in some of the requirements, both the registration and reporting requirements, and really needs to be able to support more local economic development activities. So I really look forward to moving this forward and working with the panelists here as well as a broader range of stakeholders to see what we can do in terms of actually creating a template that can be adopted not only in Minnesota but by other states going forward to try to move us to a more comprehensive national approach.
Great, thank you very much, Garth. Now, on the end, I definitely maybe last on the list here, but David, I think you were first in terms of dealing with this issue for any of us on the panel. You've been doing this longer than any of us, so you get the last word here, David.
Thank you. Well, I have been living product recycling probably since about 1991 or 1992 when the great state of Minnesota passed a law that required rechargeable battery manufacturers to collect and recycle rechargeable batteries as a condition of sale. And we set up an organization that called the Rechargeable Battery Recycling Corporation, just changed its name to call it Recycle, that has developed a nationwide program that it operates voluntarily, covers the entire country, has collection boxes in over 30,000 retailers. It's been an interesting experience for us, an approach to collecting products and getting them recycled. I work at Panasonic as the Director of Corporate Environmental Affairs for North America, and I also wear a second hat. I'm president of a company called the Electronic Manufacturers Recycling Management Company. We call it MRM for short. And I want to talk a little bit about both Panasonic and that organization, just by way of introduction. Panasonic and Sony, I think, probably did one of the first manufacturer-sponsored take-back programs in Minnesota in 1999. We learned a lot from that, been building on that. We now operate, Panasonic now operates a voluntary program. We have 1,700 collection locations around the country where we collect Panasonic products and recycle them properly. We're also very committed to proper recycling and have invested a lot of time and effort and money in the development of recycling technologies. We have about 15 patents in glass cleaning technology, glass separation technology, plastic separation technology, printed circuit board processing technology, a lot of different aspects of electronic product recycling. We also have a corporate goal of that our product lineup will consist of 16% post-consumer recycled content material by 2018. That's our 100th anniversary, and we are actively now working with recyclers around the world, processors around the world, to develop, I guess, supply routes, if you will, where we can take back materials from these products and make them into new Panasonic products. We're about 14% right now as a corporation. In 2007, we teamed up with Sharp and Toshiba to form MRM and established that as a collaborative platform for manufacturer take-back programs. We thought, especially at that point in time, that no one manufacturer was going to be able to solve this problem on their own. We were potentially facing 10, 15, 20, 30, 35, 40 different manufacturer programs that probably would not have been all that convenient for consumers and probably would not have done that great a job of collecting products across the country. So the MRM program is a program that is managed by manufacturers for manufacturers. And we now have about 40 brands that participate in this program. We've collected 292 million pounds of material since the inception of the program. We operate a voluntary program. It's also funded by Mitsubishi, Panasonic, Sharp, Toshiba, Vizio, and Sanyo. So those companies collect through MRM voluntarily across the country. And I think one of the things that we've been able to do because of the scale is probably offer more collection to rural communities, especially, for example, in Utah. The MRM program does collect a lot in rural areas. And we've been able to do that in Minnesota, Utah, a lot of other states in a way that, individual company programs probably don't address so well. So we're proud of that and that we can offer that. We also support the EPA Sustainable Management Challenge and are participating in that. We're about 97% third-party certified recyclers right now. By the end of this year, we'll be at 99%, and shortly thereafter we'll be at 100. We also support the CEA E-Cycling Leadership Initiative, the so-called billion-pound challenge, and have lent both the Panasonic brand, the Sharp, Toshiba, Vizio, other brands to that program, as well as the MRM management approach. And I think we've made a significant contribution to its growth and hopefully its future success.
Thank you very much, David, and that's very good timing because I was going to mention the E-Cycling Leadership Initiative. That is an initiative that's coordinated by CEA. It does include, as David referred to it, the Billion Pound Challenge. As a bit of background, in 2011, the consumer electronics industry arranged for recycling about 300 million pounds of consumer electronics. That has increased to approximately 460 million pounds. We're looking for a billion. We're trying to do 1 billion pounds annually by 2016. So, and frankly, this is happening because of the work that the folks on this panel are doing. Different panelists have different roles in the system, but collectively, what these folks are doing, and others that aren't here, obviously, is leading us to that goal. And David, thank you for your help with that and bringing that up. I did want to start asking a few questions to get some of the discussion going, and just kind of speak up if you want to answer the question, and then I'll ask if there are questions from the audience. So we just have been talking about the E-Cycling Leadership Initiative. And my question, I guess, specific to e-waste policy, how have industry initiatives like the E-Cycling Leadership Initiative affected e-waste policy direction? I know it's not the only initiative that's out there, but how have, I would call it, voluntary industry activities affected e-waste policy direction in the states? Anyone want to share comments on that? David?
Yeah, I think that the voluntary initiatives that we have as an industry launched over time and implemented, and it's been a long time coming, have given the industry both the footprint in any given state as we increase the number of sites. I think from the, if you look at the E-Cycling Leadership Initiative report, you'll find, I think it was, we had 5,000 sites in 2010 and 7,500 sites in 2011. Probably by 2012, hopefully will be 8,500 or so. We're starting to get fairly good coverage across the country. So that enables us to show policymakers that a program is developing and that it is expanding and that there is solutions available to their consumers right now in their states. And I think that gives us a credibility to sit down and then talk through with policymakers about what really is the best way for communities and manufacturers and recyclers to work together to solve this problem in a way that makes sense for all of us, as opposed to the prescriptive regulations that we have seen in some cases that really either grossly inflate costs, which eventually get passed on to the consumer in one way or another, or maybe establish artificial convenience requirements that are more than is really needed to serve the needs of a specific community, but also work to increase costs of offering consumer electronic product recycling services to citizens across the country. So I think that we've gotten off on a positive step by bringing these programs together and, I guess, packaging them, if that's the right word, in the CEA initiative. And congratulate CEA on your leadership in that area.
Thank you very much. Senator Urquhart, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think be proactive in working with policymakers. It's interesting that as I watch this issue evolve, we all love our consumer electronics. These products are awesome. We love them. But then when it comes to the end of the life cycle, a lot of the dialogue is, well, these are bad people generating this stuff, and what do we do with their problem? And so all of a sudden we forget that these products were so amazing a couple of years earlier. And I think it's important for the industry to step out and lead on these things rather than play defense when that is the posture. We're just looking, policymakers are forgetting that these products were once so awesome. We're just seeing, okay, here's waste, how do we do with it? What do we do with it? So rather than just play defense and fight off a lot of these proposals, I think it makes sense for the industry to step forward and say, we have solutions, and we think that these solutions actually should be embedded into law in your state. So I'd say be proactive in getting industry friendly legislation in place, because again, we were convinced in our state when we looked at it that industry friendly legislation is actually in the long term going to be the most effective legislation, because it's the industry that's going to keep pace with the innovation far better than government ever could.
Thank you. Mike?
Sure. At Dell, we've seen these public-private partnerships, these industry initiatives. Probably the best piece of all of them is the fact that they're driving awareness. Consistently, feedback that I get from our customers around the world is we didn't, and you heard from all of the panelists, the infrastructure is really growing, but the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding that these programs are out there and that the customers have some level of obligation to use these systems is probably the biggest underlying gap that we have today. And in many of our programs, we earmark dedicated funds. One of our biggest programs, we have a huge chunk of the funding earmarked as awareness, driving local awareness out to local customers to tell them how they actually take action. That's the bridge I think we're going to have to provide a solution for over the next 5 years.
Okay, thanks. Mike? Sorry, the other Mike.
Well, I think that the e-cycling leadership initiative was really groundbreaking. It was a tremendous result, because as a result of it, we had a host of manufacturers, large manufacturers, finally agree on an obligation model, and this was a very difficult process over 5 to 10 years to even come to this level of cohesion. So it was very significant, and as a result, it allowed us to drive a lot of voluntary action, particularly in states like Utah and Texas and Massachusetts, and it's really made a positive impact towards, forming legislation that is based on manufacturer market efficiencies and so forth like that.
Thanks. Well, let me follow up with that. And Mike Moss, let me come back to you. You had talked in your introduction about some ideas, and I had a question that I came to the session with. What should industry's role be in driving and implementing e-waste policy? You laid out some ideas later. What should industry's role be, and how should that compare perhaps with the government? Let's just say we're talking state level now.
Well, first off, let me say that it's essentially EPR comes around to manufacturer resource. So it's up to manufacturers to manage their resource most properly, right? So if we don't manage it, somebody else will manage it, and they won't have the same connection to the money that's being spent. So that's really the significance of the manufacturer involvement, and I think it's going to make the more optimized impact is eventually.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on that? Anyone else have thoughts on what Mike said, or what industry's role should be? Scott, you have some thoughts?
I'd actually like to go back to a comment that Mike made earlier on the government role, is driving some accountability and transparency for reporting throughout the recycling chain, but also level playing field. Right now, particularly for retailers, is the level playing field doesn't exist. It's a lot of the legislation really impacts brick and mortar, and some of our competitors that are not brick and mortar are not roped into these requirements. So I would look to legislation to level that playing field.
Okay. Other thoughts on that?
Sure. From an industry perspective, we as manufacturers know how to run businesses. We know how to get trucks on the road. We know how to move things around. We know how to do vendor management. We know how to manage the costs of these kinds of programs. That's what we do best, and that should be our role. We should run these things. And Scott, you're right. The government should have some level of oversight to make sure, in a very transparent way, that not only are we doing what we're committing to do, but there's also that level playing field. But ultimately, we should run these programs.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other thoughts, Garth?
Sure, Walter. I can just touch on that briefly. I think that the public policy process really needs to be a kind of collaborative effort, because obviously that the manufacturers bring a particular perspective, set of expertise, and so forth, but obviously there are a lot of other broader public policy goods, whether it's local government, the environmental advocacy community, what have you, that really need to be accounted for as a policy gets developed and implemented. So, but obviously, given the fact that we are dealing with an industry that is global, a lot of the product decisions are made on a global level. There's significant movement of recycling commodities and so forth across boundaries, both obviously within the U.S. and internationally, that really needs to help frame the discussions. So I really look at it as very much of a collaborative process to arrive at a positive endpoint. However, obviously, that having a unified position from the industry in terms of a vision is absolutely critical in terms of integrating into an effective process.
Great. Thank you very much, Garth. Wanted to see at this point if there are questions from the audience. I know several of you in the audience. I know several of you are not very shy. So we do have a microphone, so if folks have questions they'd like to ask any of the panelists, please raise your hand. And in the meantime, be thinking about your questions. I did want to ask one other here, and this was touched on by Senator Urquhart earlier. How has the rapid evolution of consumer electronic products and technologies affected both recycling operations and policy? And I think what would be useful at this point, maybe to talk about some case studies or specifics or just some examples of where both on an operational basis and on a policy basis, how this, I guess, the innovation that sweeps the industry over and over has affected recycling systems. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Okay. Mike Moss?
Let's see. So I think that there's a really interesting dialogue that goes on between product design and legislation. When you think about it, to a large extent, product design is driven in a large respect to regulation. And at the other side of the coin is regulation is driven by the impacts caused by products. So you have this interesting kind of choreograph between the two elements. And if we take a look at the products today as compared to 5 years ago, I mean, if we just break this down, the products are smaller, they're more energy efficient, they're designed for the environment. They're way different. Our TVs used to weigh 100 pounds per unit, now they are down to 35 pounds per unit, and that still continues. And so as a relevant example, I always like to look at some legislations, and I understand the rationale, how they evolved, but I think we're at a different time now. But some refer to targets such as pounds per capita, or there's another flawed metric, which would be percent of weight sold. So it's interesting because if we, as an example, if we look at percent of weight sold, it's a mathematical process, but if we sell 100 million pounds, we have 80% obligation, we have to process 80 million pounds, right? So what if our products, we sell the same amount of products, but they go down in weight by 20% or so? So now we're selling, instead of 100 million pounds, we're selling 80 million pounds. We're responsible for 80% of that. Now our obligation is reduced from 80 million to 2 years later to 64 million. So I don't think that's the intent of legislation. And that really is a good example that points to the need towards the ability to have a negotiated, flexible approach inside the legislation that allows manufacturers to identify with stakeholders exactly what's needed to be done and then go out and do it.
David.
Yeah, I'd like to make a point that really doesn't pertain to, I think, what we're collecting and recycling today. Starting to, but when we first started this discussion in the United States, around the world, we were talking about the need to collect and recycle these products because they contain certain toxic heavy metals, lead in TVs, CRTs, computer monitors, for example, mercury, backlights in LCD displays, televisions, other examples of cadmium, hexavalent chromium, what have you. We have pretty much eliminated these heavy metals from these products. I mean, I know my own plasma televisions are virtually lead-free. The LED backlit LCD devices and OLED devices that are coming on the market will not contain any mercury. We have replaced lead in solder with silver and copper, for example. So hopefully we're going to see a very different set of economics driven by the lack of a penalty byproduct such as lead and cadmium or hexavalent chromium, wherever that may be, in the products, as well as different, I guess, commodity values that are going to come to play and hopefully, over time change the nature of the discussion we have today about how no one can afford to do this, and therefore we need, a legislative mandate to take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Mike Watson.
I think for good or for bad, in the past, we've had one success metric in all of these programs, and it's been a weight-driven metric. I think from a policy perspective going forward, we're going to have to see a balanced scorecard of what our success factors truly are. So are we driving the proper level of awareness? Are we running these programs at a reasonable cost to our customers? Because eventually they pay for this stuff anyway, as part of the cost of the product. We're also going to have to measure for reuse. How much of this material that we're collecting is truly going back into the reuse streams. So really building a balanced metric or a scorecard of success factors and driving away from that simple single success metric of how much did you collect. And you heard us all talking about, we're driving to 1 billion pounds. It's a different, the next 10 years is going to be dramatically different because of the weight of the products and the form factor shrinking.
Yep. Cindy?
Thank you, Walter. Well, we're at an interesting crossroads right now because half of the country has mandates and half doesn't. So we're looking towards something different happening now. We know that already from the experience that we have had is that a lot of these programs are, they're not equitable, they're inconsistent, as you were saying. What happens when, the products are less in weight? Then you have a situation where all of a sudden it goes backwards, from what we were doing. So what do we do? Do we look towards not regulating the rest of the country? And that's what we're talking about here today. We need standardization for that to happen. We need to have some sort of, like you said, level playing field, so I'm in agreement with what everyone's saying here. We need a way to track it. We need a way to prove it. We need a way to see that, this actually is occurring. Are the recycling facilities actually doing what they say that they're doing? Are they credible? Are they transparent? And so these are the types of things that I think that the consumers are interested in. And they may actually be willing to pay for that in some fashion. Just knowing that they're doing the right thing, knowing that something is being taken care of properly, makes them feel good. It's an emotional thing. The manufacturers are very much engaged in this. They do understand that. We know that from our experience with working with them that they are concerned about their image environmentally. And we think that there's a way for all of us to work together to, and we're actually doing it. It is actually happening right now. It's just that, again, maybe consumer awareness. Maybe the public needs to be informed about what we're all doing. And that is one key factor that I see to really launching this and maybe fending off some of the regulation that we might see coming. So we can have voluntary programs and the industry can take care of it.
Great. Thank you very much. Wanted to see any questions from the audiences. Actually, this gentleman in the tan blazer, and then you next.
Thank you, Walter. Parker Brugge from Best Buy. First of all, excellent discussion by a great panel of experts. One of the themes that I've picked up on, and I think Cindy kind of tied it together just now, is this idea of shared responsibility. So we've heard about the role of manufacturers, the role of retailers, the role of the recycler, the role of government. But it seems like we haven't touched on the role of consumers. And when you put requirements in place that really don't involve the consumer, I'm just curious from the panel's perspective, what should that role be, and how do they fit into this idea of a shared responsibility to deal with a very complex problem? Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Garth? Or Senator Urquhart? Yeah, please.
That's a great question. It makes me think of the littering problem, you know. I mean, a lot of us remember before we really got serious about that as a nation. I mean, man, everyone just drive down the highway and just fling it out the window, and everything was a mess. And, you know, how on earth could government combat such a problem? And the answer is it can't. What you needed was public awareness and public education. Just tell people, hey, we can do better than this. And I think, you know, I think Cindy's point that if we educate the public that options are out there, that these products, there's a better end for them than to go into the landfill, I really think that people will step up. And so I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I think that is the answer to this, that if industry steps up, and, you know, again, to another point Cindy made about, there's a vacuum out there in half the states, and politicians, man, do we hate a vacuum, you know? If there's not something in place, we will fill it, and we might mess up in doing that. And so I think industry should step up in those states and say, hey, we have a way for you. And by that, before we pass this legislation, you know, consumers, citizens, they might not have known what to do with it. They wouldn't have had the opportunity to be responsible. But as this piece of legislation continues to evolve and we have more points where they can deliver their stuff, like littering, I think people absolutely will step up.
Thank you very much. Garth?
Well, Parker, that's a great question. And from my perspective is that the consumer education and awareness piece is directly integrated into the regulatory approach, frankly. We went from maybe 60-some locations, if that, in Minnesota prior to the law that were accepting material to nearly 300. The volume of material that was collected was dramatically different. Now, you know, obviously, the law helped spur that, as well as a disposal ban, which we really view as, frankly, a education tool more than anything else. And so it seems to me that particularly in today's media context and the number of messages that consumers are receiving on a daily basis for a whole variety of different issues, that it's going to be extremely difficult to just simply rely on education and outreach to really being able to serve those consumer needs, frankly. I think they really have to integrate that into a larger regulatory context that really does address, frankly, some of those economic barriers that David mentioned in terms of a level playing field and really trying to provide those low-cost access options for consumers.
Okay, thanks. I believe we have one more audience question here. Let's see if we have time for another, but at least this one. Yes.
Hi. My name is Angela Cho. I'm from E-Waste Center. We're located in Southern California. We're electronic waste recycling facility. And I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for all of the panel members, and I have huge respect for what you're doing right now. My question is, more specifically on environmental education and awareness. So when I was studying at UC Berkeley as an environmental science student, you know, being surrounded in that kind of atmosphere, I thought, oh wow, there's a lot of environmental education and awareness going on. But now that I'm working in SoCal, one challenge that I see as because I do a lot of collection events and I go out to schools and give educational presentations, and one thing I noticed was a lot of people don't know about this still. And so I know, Mr. Watson, you mentioned that you do focus on local community building awareness. And I'm curious as to know what specific ways were successful so that I can actually incorporate that into my presentations and encourage others to do so as well.
So we found recently that social media has really, really helped. It targets specific audiences, specific behaviors, and helps them understand how to take action, and that, of course, grows virally. We've tried print, we've tried newspaper, we've tried co-branding with our catalogs that go out. You know, we put a lot of information out in front of our customers. So we've tested it all. We know mostly what works, and for the dollar, where to get the most bang for the buck. And it typically has been targeted around social media. It seems to really drive spikes, big spikes in collection volumes.
Yeah, Cindy and then David.
Angela, thank you for asking that question. You know, this is where I think where innovation is key, because I've been in the in the electronic waste recycling industry for about 12 years, and we've had collection events. We've had so many different activities. We work with the waste management companies. There's maybe some fundraising events that happen. So, at curbside recycling, I mean, we know there's all sorts of different ways to collect this material. And people hear about it maybe through a grassroots type of method. So what Mike was saying is very important, maybe some kind of social media, ways to get to the consumers that let them know that this is something that's convenient for them, that is accessible. And it could be like I have a 16-year-old daughter. So when she's 21, it's probably going to be well known to her exactly what to do with this. This generation that we're bringing up right now, it's going to be a given. They're going to understand, but it's going to take work to get there. So that's why innovation is really important. And those that have those creative ideas can come forward, and this is a great time for them to take advantage of the opportunities that are there to get the message out. Thank you.
Okay, David, and we're just about out of time, so we don't have any more time for questions.
I appreciate the question, but I don't know about your specific situation, but if you look at the rechargeable battery industry and what they did, again, there's one program for all manufacturers to participate in collect and recycle batteries. This was before social media. I'm not sure what they really do today, but they created a number of templates that like a local recycling coordinator could either download or reprint and distribute, or put a small, maybe a sample ad or a sample news article in the local paper, very simply. And I thought that worked fairly well because we had fixed locations that the local recycling coordinator could really work on telling people that these are there for you to use. And I guess in our situation today, I'm not sure it's that simple, but we do have greener gadgets, Earth 9/11, CEA is doing some public service announcements now that might be leveraged. So I'd ask you to check that out.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank the panel. We don't have time for any more questions at this point, but I'm sure you'll be around for at least a few minutes, so if people do have questions, feel free to come up. But I want to ask folks to join me in thanking our panelists for being here today. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day at CES.
Always good seeing you.